Okay, so welcome back to the Joe Dunnrite Show. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Tote Gote and how it evolved into a motorcycle called the Twister. But today we're going to talk about the Tote Gote. So back in the 60s, there was a gentleman named Bonham that created a off-road mini bike looking machine. And the idea behind it was that you could take your Tote Gote out deer hunting, and when you shot your deer, then you could go retrieve your deer and take it home. Tote Gotes are actually a little bit bigger than this, but he did create one for a smaller version called the Mini Gote. I don't know if you can see that on the back of the seat, but it was really designed for kids. And the Mini Gote was built in 1965. It came stock with a 5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton motor. It uses a Salisbury centrifugal clutch, which drives a belt that then drives a jack shaft. And this particular setup uses a single jack shaft, and the brake actually is attached to the jack shaft. So when you put the brake, it actually slowed down the jack shaft. There is no braking on the wheels. Which for this particular machine was okay. We'll talk about when it evolved into a more aggressive machine, but it's got a very large sprocket. That's about a 50-tooth sprocket. It's geared very low. This bike will probably do about maybe 45 miles an hour. It actually goes pretty good. Now, the motor that was on this, my dad bought this in 1965, and it had the 5 horse Briggs on it. And I've got there's 5 kids in the family, and we rode the heck out of this thing, and that motor was pretty well shot. And back in about 2006, I completely took this down, repainted it, put in just a standard 6.5 horsepower Champion motor for my kids, and they proceeded in about 2 hours to wreck the thing. One of my son's buddies flipped it and scraped it all up, bent the fender, bent the fender back here. And basically at that point in time, after the kids couldn't treat it with respect, I pulled the spark plug and it sat for a while. But it does run. Let's see if I can get it started. So we're not going to run it up and down the street unless I had somebody to help, but it does run. It goes quite well. So this was a very popular machine, the Tote Gotes. They sold thousands of them, and they actually got to the point where they were racing Tote Gotes in the late 60s. I would say mid-late 60s. They would get together on the weekends and they'd race Tote Gotes. And basically it was a single class. You got on your machine, you rode in the desert around a track. Sometimes they were a couple of laps around a 15 to 25 mile track, and the winner was the person that had the best time. They didn't start it like a motocross race does today. They started you off 30 seconds apart, and then you're on your own and you pass your people as you go. And that was a weekend thing. A lot of people here in Arizona did that. They rode their Tote Gotes. So then what happened, and we're going to evolve into the next round, is the Tote Gotes were pretty fun. They were really geared down low. They didn't go very fast. So in Phoenix, there was a gentleman named Jim Todd who owned a company called Todd Sales. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the Twister. So the Twister was an evolution of the Tote Gote, and they built these to compete with the Tote Gote, the Twisters. And Jim Todd, who owned Todd Sales, was basically a Bearcat dealer for Bearcat and Rupp mini bikes. And he was selling those in Phoenix, and he had a few folks that worked for him that they decided they could make a better Tote Gote. So a person named Guy Wakefield, Benny Griffin, and Jim Todd went off to build the Twister. And these are all handmade. They made them. They welded them all up. But this particular model uses a dual jack shaft with the same setup with the brake. So it's got the brake on the jack shaft. This is geared very low. These bikes probably went maybe 25 miles an hour, but they could climb a hill. And that's what most of these racetracks were. They weren't flat out open desert racetracks like you see today. These were up and down some really steep hill, more technical riding than fast. And the Twisters did really well against the Tote Gotes. They were winning the races and doing well. They came stock with a 6 horsepower Briggs & Stratton, standard 8-inch wheels, and they use the same type of clutch as the Mini Gotes. So we're gonna pull one of these out, and we'll set that up for the second episode, and I'll tell you more details. But for now, we're just going to get this posted, let you guys start talking, and then we'll transition off from the Twisters to the Hot Shots. Thanks.